Hey everyone, I'm really excited for today's interview. It's with a friend of mine named Patrick Bardsley. He has a PhD in applied mathematics and he works as a machine learning engineer. Let's get into it. Okay, sweet. Hey everybody, this is my friend Patrick Bardsley. He's been a friend of mine for a long time now, and I've wanted to ever since I had the idea to do this kind of podcast format. He was another one that I made sure to add to my list to make sure I talk to him. So I'll give him a second to kind of introduce himself and what he does and what he studied in school.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Jake. My name's Patrick. Like you said, I went to school. I originally did an undergraduate in mathematics, and then I went on to do a PhD in applied mathematics and got a master's in statistics on the way as well. Um, Kind of fell into math. I've always kind of liked it, but I just ended up following it through school as kind of the quickest way out at the time. And it turned out not being the quickest way out because it sucked me into graduate school and all that. But once I did graduate, I followed a postdoc down to UT Austin. And then I did make the switch finally out of academics into industry. My first position was actually at a bank for just a few months and found out really quickly it was not for me. And switched over to an engineering firm called Cirrus Logic, which is where I'm still at. I've been there for close to 8 years. So
Gotcha.
yeah, I'm a machine learning engineer at this point, data
Machine learning
scientist and
engineer.
machine learning
That's
engineer.
that's one thing I wanted to ask you because I wasn't 100% sure on your title. Like did your title include the word engineer? I didn't
It
know if
does.
that was okay. That's interesting. Do you think, I mean, we'll get into it, but do you think most people that graduate in mathematics or applied mathematics end up becoming an engineer?
No. If they go into like graduate school for mathematics, a lot of them are trying to follow the academic track. But if they do go into industry like myself, they probably end up with some sort of a title like data scientist. That's
Data
probably more
scientist.
common than machine learning engineer. But I would, yeah, I mean, machine learning engineering is going to be close to applied mathematics, but I doubt that they're going to get any kind of a real engineer title like I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm an electrical engineer. They might get a data engineering title. So there's those are the kind of the two that I can think of where you would actually have engineer in the title.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, I have a bunch more questions floating through my brain, but I kind of want to
Sure.
go through this chronologically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So, what, let's go back to the beginning. I guess what made you initially start or become interested and choose the road of mathematics, for your bachelor's degree?
Yeah. Good question. When I was originally in undergrad, I was kind of lost, which I think is not completely uncommon for an undergraduate. You're supposed to follow your passion and find whatever's perfect for you, and I could not find that. And so I was just kind of spending time and money for the first 2 years of undergraduate. And I originally kind of had the intent of going into engineering. So I did take some introduction to electrical engineering courses. This was kind of after I had done some of the prereqs, so some of the math and the physics that you're required to get into these intro courses. And I remember being in the intro course and realizing that I could not stand not knowing where the equation came from. I was handed the equation, told to solve this circuit with this particular equation, and it drove me nuts to just be handed it. I needed to see it from first principles more. Um, so ultimately, I could tell that engineering wasn't really a fit for me. And at the time, I was kind of young and just wanted to be done with school, frustrated, and just like at that. And so at that time, all of the prereqs that I filled were a bunch of math classes because in order to go into engineering, you have to do a bunch of math classes, a bunch of physics
Yeah.
classes. And so at the time, the closest degree I could get was mathematics. That was the fastest way out of school. So I decided to go into math. And so that's what originally made my decision for me was how can I do this quickly?
Did you have anything in mind what you were going to do after you graduated?
Not a clue.
Not a
Not a
clue.
clue.
Just get the degree.
Yep, get a degree, go get a job somewhere doing something somewhat techy.
And is it at the undergrad stage, is it just mathematics or is there like different avenues?
Yeah, I mean, it is just mathematics. You can kind of choose your electives that kind of start pushing you in different avenues of math, but the branch, when you actually start to kind of take specific mathematics courses, it is more of a graduate school thing.
It becomes more specialized once you go graduate
Yeah.
school.
I mean, for example, I took some pure math, what are considered pure math classes during my undergraduate. And then during graduate, I was all applied mathematics.
Yeah. What is define applied mathematics?
Yeah. So a lot of the classical mathematicians actually would take issue with kind of segregating mathematics into pure and applied tracks, but it's just kind of the way of the world right now. Applied mathematics, you're typically studying something that has some sort of an application in mind. It's as close to engineering as you can get while still staying in mathematics.
So, you have, I guess, theoretical mathematics and applied mathematics, and stuff slowly trickles out of here and goes into here.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And a lot of the time you'll end up using, yeah, exactly. You'll use concepts from pure mathematics, but it might take 50 years. Like
Yeah.
I think a good example of this is where the X-ray comes from. The radon transform was originally developed in what are kind of more pure mathematical circles, and eventually it was picked up by applied mathematicians and engineers. Like, oh man, we can use this for X-rays, and that's really kind of how that tech was born.
That's super. That's cool. I like learning that kind of stuff where it comes from.
Yeah.
So your undergrad, so you started taking the more just straight up mathematics classes, and you found that drive a little bit more with you.
hmm hmm
Um, was it more difficult, or did you find it easier because it was more interesting?
More I wouldn't necessarily say more or less difficult, but it's not like it all of a sudden got easy. I mean, math was still hard, which is kind of
Were
one
you,
of the things like through this entire conversation, like math's hard for everybody, even people that are good at math. So like just putting that out there.
yeah, and that's one thing I really want to talk about. It's just like a whole. It seems like it's a foreign thing, no
Yeah.
matter what who you are. Yeah, that you have to learn. Everybody has kind of different starting points. It seems like, and I think some people maybe it comes to a little bit faster, but it. Um, well, okay, let's talk about that. What was your like high school experience like with math? How far did you go?
I was enrolled in AP Calculus, and that was my senior year. So that would have been the highest that I went. But during my senior year, I was wanting to be a ski bum and not actually take school seriously. And so I ended up dropping AP Calculus, which in some sense was kind of a catalyst as to why I ended up following it a lot through undergrad as well. Because I had a really good math instructor at my high school, and he really didn't want me to drop AP Calculus, and he kind of gave me a hard time over it, rightfully so. And I kind of carried that with me, and that kind of was like, okay, I need to double down when I'm in college and make sure I take some math classes for him. And I did, and then ended up going all the way.
Does he know what you ended up doing?
He does, yeah. I took a moment a year ago actually to write him just a letter of like, I just wanted you to know how much of an influence and impact you had on my life because it's cool. It was just a nice moment to share with somebody like that.
Did you hear back from him?
Yeah, yeah, he wrote me back. He was really appreciative of the message, and he said I because I expressed that I have two young children at home, and he's like, you'll have so much fun teaching them as they grow. So I'm really happy to hear that. But yeah, it was a good
That's
conversation.
that's cool. I think everybody has, one or two teachers that have that impact on them, and it's cool that you let them know because most people probably don't let their
Right.
teachers know, and it doesn't take many of those, interactions for I think to really have an impact on the people who teach us.
Yeah, I hope that it
Uh,
had an impact for him, but because he had an impact
oh,
on me, so
oh, I guarantee it did. I'm sure he went to his family and was like, "I created a wizard,"
a mathematician.
a mathematician. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk about studying, because that's a lot of the stuff I'm gonna start talking more about on my channel, and um, a topic that I'm really going to start diving a lot deeper into. What was your, how did your studying process evolve as you got more and more into your kind of more difficult classes?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I first started with kind of like, I'm going to focus mostly on math courses. Obviously, I took all the gen ed stuff that everybody does, and my
Sure.
studying habits for them were not nearly as refined, sophisticated, and it didn't work as well. But for math, it worked for me. So calculus would have been like the earlier courses for me, and I did study with groups at the time. So it would be like me and one other friend that was also taking the class, and we would kind of sit down and we would go through a little bit of the homework exercises. And at the time, I didn't have as much of an issue with the courses, so that worked for me still. I didn't have to spend quite as much time studying. I remember kind of the transition point for me into like really hard mathematics for myself was right around the like I guess you'd probably call it the sophomore junior years. When you start to break into what's called analysis, and that I had to spend hours studying and actually going through proofs and then like trying to recreate the proofs. It wasn't enough to just go through the homework exercises and just make sure I understood how the exercise worked. I needed to kind of do extra homework exercises to make sure that I was spending enough time to really uh, do more than just the homework exercises. Like I needed to be able to take the same concepts from the homework but apply it in kind of a different form. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, so in these classes that you're talking about, were they like traditional math classes? I guess that most engineers are used to, where we learn how to solve problems and then we use those techniques to solve problems. Was
Yeah,
it
no,
like that?
and that's
It
when they got
wasn't.
harder. No,
Yeah.
because like when it was just like find the solution to the problem, I could do those tests in pretty much the same form as like the calculus. I had to spend more time as the problems got harder because the concepts got harder when you're doing things like partial differential equations and
Yeah.
eigenvalues and stuff like that. It gets weird. Um, but you could just kind of do it formulaically and just kind of go through their
It's
homework.
just
I'm talking about this transition where you go into mathematics, you start doing more analysis. So actually, the test would be prove something. And so you actually needed to know all the different techniques of proof for this style of problem. And this is kind of even nowadays, I would look at it and be like, these are easy analysis problems, but they're still proofs. And so you need to know what are you trying to do and how can you do it rather than here's the formula to follow. There was no more formula anymore. It was just a bunch of high level concepts.
so it's like, a bunch of things are true, and you
Mm-hmm.
know that you have a bunch of rules,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to basically extrapolate all that into something else that's true.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah.
right. Like a good example, I guess, would that just kind of jumps to mind is prove a function f of x y is continuous. So there is a formula of more or less how to do this, but you still have to prove it, and you need to understand why doing these steps actually proves a function is continuous. Like that's to give a concrete example.
Yeah, and then whatever you put down on paper has to be like rock solid, right? It's not
Yes.
leaking anywhere.
Yes, that's right.
Gotcha. Whenever I listen to interviews of like astrophysicists and some of these like high level like quantum physicist guys, and they talk about, well, the math told me this and the math told me that. I'm always just like, I want to be in their head and I want to understand what they understand when they say
Right.
those things, because it's like engineers don't get to the point,
Mm-hmm.
where math kind of becomes more of a language.
Mm-hmm.
We learn it just to the point where it's just a tool to solve engineering problems.
Right.
But it always is so interesting to me when I hear those people talk about math that way, where it's like, I wish I had that understanding of math where I could really treat it like something that's talking to me, or I can anyway.
Yeah, no,
It's a,
I get your point. Just to kind of add to that, yeah, it does get to that point where you, like you said, with the word bulletproof on a proof, uh, you do get to the point where you're writing out analysis on like a new research topic or something, and you can actually just write out all of your assumptions and implications. And like the implications are what tell you, that's what the math is telling you. It says, because you assumed that you're doing this and A happened, then B has to happen. And so you kind
yeah.
of get these logic patterns, and that's when they say things like the math is telling you this. They just have really sophisticated A's that tell them what happens when B happens, right?
And you kind of just have to memorize all those.
It's not really memorization. It's more of like a learning how to use a tool. I wouldn't call it memorization at all.
Okay. That's interesting. Well, okay, so let's go back to studying. So once your classes got a little bit harder, did you have a study group that you kind of formulated?
So yes and no. I would say that it's important to have somebody to study with, but I wouldn't necessarily say that a group is a good idea. A group can sometimes be a little bit too, especially like in the earlier years, can be a little bit too distracting. It's too easy to kind of get off topic and talk about something else. But I
Yeah,
think
it's
it's,
got
go ahead, go ahead.
got to be the right group.
Yes, like if you have the right group, completely like a set of completely motivated individuals, I think that's
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
So, but my study groups went from, five-ish down to like two to three. People that
Interesting.
really wanted to do well on the exams.
Yeah. I remember. So mine, now that I think about it, mine did too. Mine went down to like three of us, three or four maybe. But I had a list of like 12
Hmm.
in case we had a big problem or a question that we needed answered. We could just blast out questions to our kind of, network.
Hmm.
Now, let me ask you this. So if you were like studying for an exam, what was your process? Say you had an exam in a week from now. What was your process?
So just for my own kind of clarity, undergrad or graduate, because they were a little bit different.
Let's say undergrad.
Okay. So for undergrad, it was typically going through because so we would get exams on like an entire section of material. And so it would really be going through the hardest examples that we could pull from the homeworks. Just me and actually, I think at the time it was one, maybe two other guys who I still keep in contact with, good friends. Um, and we would go through the hardest examples, and typically we would kind of like not lock ourselves, but we'd go into a study room that has whiteboards, and each person would take a turn, kind of, especially at like these analysis levels where you're writing out proofs. Each person would take a turn up at the board writing out a proof to one of the examples, and then we would switch to a different question, and somebody else would write their answer. So we would take turns going to the board writing out our solution to this analysis question, and then kind of through that process we would gain confidence in doing the actual proving, but also it would give us a chance to kind of watch somebody else's approaches and see how they're going to do the
And
analysis.
kind of poke holes in each other's
Uh-huh.
stuff.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or
That
see a
kind of
different,
goes.
even just seeing a different perspectives is hugely helpful, right?
I totally agree. Yeah. um, Before you would meet up with your group, would you take time and just read through the textbook on your own? Or when you're at that level, do they have textbooks like
Yeah,
normally?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean they're behind me. All those analysis texts are still here. uh, yes, I would kind of like pull myself into context, especially if I was coming from work or whatever it was at the time. I would pull myself into context, just get myself up to speed, kind of get the brain working. But as far as like, I did have some individual study time. It wasn't all just group study. I would kind of do the group study and then probably later that night go home by myself and actually just kind of go through stuff quickly again and make sure I understood how I wanted to solve it.
Gotcha.
So go from kind of these group ideas, like big divergent ideas, see somebody else's approach, but eventually you do want to, or at least when I say you, I mean I wanted to narrow it down to a particular uh, method for
Well, yeah,
solving.
I think the whole process is a process of eliminating questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, you have all these questions, and then it's all coming down to where all the
Mm-hmm.
questions are now gone, and I can explain this to somebody pretty
Right.
easily.
Right.
Yeah, later on I found that one of the best ways to determine if you know something um, kind of well is if you can teach it to somebody, in simple terms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's good that you say that because that's kind of why we would do the study room and go to the board. Because if you can explain your idea and like what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do the analysis to your friends,
yeah.
that's a good way of showing that you actually know how to teach the material. You start to master it at that point.
And then being able to like say it verbally. It's different when
Yes.
it's just going through your head, but being able
Yeah.
to like, and then when it comes out of your mouth, sometimes it's like, that doesn't make sense what I just said. You know what I
Right.
mean? Yeah, that
Which is the
happens a
same
lot.
icon, and like coming out of your mouth is not much different than writing it down on a piece of paper for a
True.
test, right?
Hey everyone, I really hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. If you are, make sure you hit that like button and share it with anybody who you think might find it interesting. Also, I'm really excited to announce my new course, the 2.0 to 4.0 Masterclass. This is the class that I wish I had at the beginning of my engineering degree. Self-confidence, self-discipline, right? How to prioritize your time, how to manage your stress, how to learn and study effectively, right? How to do well in exams, and how to build momentum. You can ask any college engineering or graduated student. Those are the things that end up biting most students right in the butt. And unfortunately, you're usually just left to learn those things on your own. There are some universities that are kind of waking up and, teaching a course that focuses on this stuff. And Auburn University is one of them. And they actually require my book as the text for that course. But, the unfortunate reality is most universities just kind of leave this kind of stuff for you to figure out on your own. Which is why I wanted to create a course that focuses on this, a course that I wish I had when I went to school, right? One that teaches you how to become an effective student, one that's capable of getting straight A's while still maintaining a life. The course is available now, and it's actually at a discounted rate for this first few rounds that I'm going to teach. So if you're interested, I suggest to jump on it. Check the description for a link to the course and for a link to my book. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at becominganengineer123@gmail.com. Check the description for links to all of it. Thanks for the support, and back to the conversation. I remember me and you were talking the other day, and you said that at one point, you were struggling and you kind of hit a point where you really had to figure out how to succeed,
Mm-hmm.
studying wise, kind of performance wise. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So it was about the same time when I was explaining that I kind of left electrical engineering because it wasn't working for me. I did make the switch to math because it was the fastest track out. But at that time, I had only taken kind of the more computational type math courses. I hadn't done analysis, which is required to get a math degree. So my first struggles, true struggles with the degree was going into this analysis course, Foundations of Analysis 1. And at the time, I had a full load. I think it was like 15 hours, something like that, 15 credit hours. And I had 3 jobs. And
What?
yeah, I mean, when I say 3 jobs, it sounds a little bit much. It was like one day a week, I had like an 8 hour shift, which was the one job. And then the other 2 jobs were both waiter jobs. And I would kind of split the time on the weeknights between the two places. But still, I was working probably 40 to 50 hours.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was rough and it didn't work. Um,
No.
and I was in this analysis course, and it's the first time that you actually are no longer just asked to just solve this problem with this method. You're actually asked to prove why does B happen if A happens. And it was extremely abstract and really hard. And I ended up having to withdraw. So that was like my worst performance in a class. I was about halfway through the semester. I was actually past the withdrawal date, so I couldn't drop.
No.
I was past the withdrawal date, and I had to go in and talk to the dean of the College of Science to petition for a late withdrawal. And I was able to explain that I had had a bunch of stuff in my personal life happening. So I'd had all this work that was happening. On top of that, I got in a really nasty car accident. Like, it was just bad timing, and I had to petition for a late withdrawal, and that was really tough. At the time, I thought maybe college isn't for me. I was pretty close to just like, oh, maybe I'll just go get a job somewhere else. I already had 3, but I mean like a real job, like a permanent gig.
Right.
So that was kind of a low point. And what I decided to do was during the summer, because this was during the spring semester. So during the summer semester, I decided to take that analysis course and just see how I did. And I ended up getting an A because I finally got rid of 2 of the jobs actually. I moved back in with my parents, which is not really the like fun thing that everybody wants to do, but I needed to do it if I like really wanted to kind of focus on my life. I did this Foundations of Analysis course, got an A, and it that finally understood how to approach that type of a course instead of just trying to find the solution. I actually understood that I needed to like learn how to prove things and learn what math is all about. And that was the turning point for me. As soon as I made it through that course during that summer, um, I was able to take it the rest of the way. That was the hardest class for me to get through for sure.
How did you, I guess, describe your, process of kind of going through that summer where, you needed to change how you approached, the course, and how did you learn the new way of learning? You know what I mean? Kind of how did you
Mm-hmm.
go about that?
So there was a bit of stubbornness for sure because I was frustrated with having to do the earlier withdrawal, the withdrawal in the previous semester. So I was kind of
Yeah.
like mad at myself almost and wanted to like prove that I could do something better than that. So the process of like kind of learning this new style was like reading the material over and over and over again, and then reading it again. I had had a really nasty tendency at that time of not spending as much time with the textbook as I should. I would kind of like glance through the examples. Oh, this is how you're doing it. This is how you solve it.
This,
Instead of reading.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's so. It's so. I think there's so many students that go through that. I went through that same thing.
Hmm.
I don't think I opened a textbook. Uh, I can't even remember opening a textbook in high school, and then um, in college it was just kind of let me skim this. Let me
Hmm.
skim that. Let me find the figure that they talked about or whatever. You're used to being able to get by sufficiently with just kind of
That's
you
the high
know
school way, right? At least
that's
in
the
the
high school
U.S.
way. Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, I made a video about that a few weeks ago that there's just a real huge gap in what is expected in high school compared to
Hmm.
what's expected if you go into like a STEM degree.
Totally.
Um,
It
but
comes
yeah,
down
so
to that old like parents telling you need to apply yourself. It's like, well, you actually do need to apply yourself.
yeah. But don't you tell me I need to figure it out for
Yeah,
myself, right? I
that's
need to
right.
fail miserably and get find
Figure it, and you're
myself
still
crying on
going
the
mom and dad.
floor. Yeah,
You're
that
still wrong.
yeah, that's so true. It sucks. I know. I That's so funny. It's so funny how you know, yeah, because I have kids too, and it's like, when can I start teaching them about financial freedom? Is 4 too young? Like, are they gonna? Will
Yes,
they
dude.
absorb it?
It's too young.
It's just like all this stuff. You know, it comes down to pain is the greatest teacher, right? I
Uh-huh.
think is basically what it all comes down to.
Hmm.
And a lot of stuff you just kind of got to learn through, but by going through some pain. Hopefully, not everything, but okay. I think by going through some of these things, you end up thinking in your head, "Whoa, I need to start listening to people that have the experience a little bit more."
Hmm.
That's one big lesson. Anyway, I cause so I bring that up because I had a very similar experience to you, right? Where I failed more classes than you did, though, even though yours wasn't technically a fail. I
Uh-huh.
failed, I don't know, 3 or 4 classes. I withdrew from chemistry, and but I did fail thermodynamics one, and it was the same story. I was used to just kind of, you know, I mean, it felt hard to me, but I wasn't like really turning my effort to here,
Right.
and it's like, okay, so I had to retake thermodynamics over the summer, and I basically I write about this in my book, but basically I said, okay, I'm going to pretend that someone is going to offer me $1 million to get a good do good in thermodynamics, right?
Hmm.
And because if you ask yourself that question, like, could you perform well if someone offered you whatever $1 billion? The
Right.
answer is always yes, right? It's like, yeah, I probably could. It kind of removes everybody's objections.
Yeah, you kind of need
So
to find,
then,
but you need to find that personal motivator, right?
yes, but it removes all of the, I don't think I'm smart enough, or I don't think I can do it, or I don't have the you know wherewithal, or I don't have the time management. I can't deal with procrastination, whatever. It kind of removes all that. It's like, well,
Right.
if you had if the answer to that question is yes, then you know that there is a path for you that exists to go get that thing. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, now I just need to go down that path, right? Anyway, so yeah, I just turned the effort up to 1,000, and that was the my 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 reason for living that summer, and I got an A. So it's like, oh, okay, there's a lot more to it than
Yeah.
that, but on how you study and how you learn and how you prepare for tests. But I mean, it all comes down to where you're putting your mental energy, right?
Right. And yeah, like it's a very similar story to mine. And I guess kind of just back to your original question though, it was like, what was my process? It was reading, like actually spending the time and reading the text and
Yeah.
actually immersing yourself in the material, not just kind of tertiary glance at it, move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. That was mine as well. Where step one for me was read that section in the textbook or chapters or whatever we were talking about at the time. And I didn't stop reading and rereading until I understood it, right?
That's right.
If you have questions that come up, you go ask your professor or you go ask the internet or whatever, and then you just keep reading. And then once you understand the textbook, then you can move on to kind of how to apply what it's talking about. That was the biggest change I made for sure.
Something else that I might kind of like touch on here though is like, even though this is my process, I wouldn't say that it was like painless. Like I remember that analysis course and like it's going to sound kind of funny, but I remember like being like curled up in the fetal position, like thinking as hard as I possibly could, and just being frustrated that I couldn't quite see the answer to a particular, analysis question being asked. It was hard. Like it was a struggle, even with this process. It was just hard.
It's funny. You just confirmed the stereotype I had in my head for math majors, where you're just sitting there like this,
Yeah,
imagining
that's right.
thing.
You're not wrong. That's what we do.
and then,
A lot of times it
and then
turns
all
into
of it,
this.
yeah, just like trying to put together this thing in your head. Have you seen the movie, the one about the nuclear bombs,
Oppenheimer?
Oppenheimer,
I have not.
where they kind of tried to show that in his head he was just like staring at a wall, throwing wine glasses into a corner, and it's like, all right, like I guess this is what they got to go through.
No, I haven't seen that, but I do want to.
That's what he does. He's trying to figure out. I can't remember, but something to do with like the formulation of how the atomic bomb works, and he's just in the corner like throwing glasses, trying to
That's
like see
awesome.
how things break. And anyway, so you made me think of that.
Yeah,
if
good. I'm
if
glad we did
anybody is
that.
watching this video and is majoring in math, please confirm. I guess make Pat feel better,
Yeah, thank you.
and let us know that you've had some moments of despair in the fetal position. That's so
That's
funny.
right.
That's so funny. Well, so okay, let me ask you this: when you're in those moments where you're just like hitting the wall, what do you do?
Well, there's kind of two things that I have done over the years, and I wouldn't necessarily say that the obvious one, well, okay, so there's two things. The first one is to keep going and keep grinding and keep smashing your head against the wall. Sometimes that works. It does. Sometimes it does. And you're like, finally, you get that kind of almost eureka moment. But by far, the one that works more for me is the harder one for me to do, which is to walk away and go do something else for a little bit and let the
Yeah.
brain kind of like just sit for a second. And then more often than not, when I'm off doing whatever it is, hiking, running, whatever it is, usually something active, um, all of a sudden then I can kind of come back to it and I rebuild the structure in my mind and then I see the answer, something like that. Like that happens so much more frequently than to like grinding against it. But the like knee jerk reaction is to keep grinding. And like it's hard for me to walk away from it.
Well, because it feels counterproductive to walk away.
Right. Totally.
And I'm so happy you said what you said because it confirms everything I talk about and everything, that I've learned after school about
Right.
how it actually works. So when you come up to something and you're just like grinding against it, um, that effort to understand it is essential, right? So you have to hit
Mm-hmm.
the wall and you have to bang your head against it a bunch
And
of
you do.
times. So
Yeah. Yes, you do.
whatever it is, and then you stop, and once you've kind of hit that point, once you walk away and you go do something, and especially if it's active, where you are no longer engaged here, it's actually called there's focused mode and then there's diffuse mode in your brain. And when you engage diffuse mode, um, all of those things inside your head, it's crazy because it's almost like this program that you have no idea exists, but it's this program in your head that kind of just literally like subconsciously keeps figuring it out, and then randomly it'll just be like, oh, here's your answer, and you'd be like,
Yeah.
well, you know like I'll get it's this happens to me a lot, when I'm in between sleep and awake,
Mhm.
um not, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
where you're kind of conscious but not fully. My brain will throw ideas and throw things into my conscious mind where it's like, what the hell? Like, I was I was working on thinking about that like 4 weeks ago. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you for the idea. It's pretty crazy how that works. But
I didn't
and
I didn't know that was the name of it, but like I can definitely attest to like that effect where it's like all of a sudden you're just kind of hip, it's like, oh, there's the answer. That's weird. I knew something was happening, but
well, no, they've done studies on this. Your neurons, when you go to diffuse mode,
uh-huh.
your neurons literally grow new connections to then help your brain do what you were trying to make it do.
That's cool.
So it is cool. So the more you do that, the more you hit the wall, and then disengage, the more your brain. It's just like I always think of it's just like exercise, right?
Right.
You lift weights until you get tired, and then you go home and your muscles get bigger, right? And then you
Hmm.
go the next day and you can lift more weights. It's like exactly the same thing. It's it's hard for people to think of it that way because when you hit the wall, you feel stupid, you
Hmm.
know, and it's people need to disconnect that, I think, kind of feeling, because it's just all you're doing is just working it out.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I'm glad that you confirmed that
Yeah.
because it's
And it's
so true.
also it's cool to hear kind of more of the actual science behind it, like the diffuse mode, like you call it. It's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how it works. And I like really a lot have this experience when I exercise, when I run, because when I'm running, I or mountain biking or whatever, I'm so disengaged, right? My brain is not focusing on anything. And it's allowed to just kind of process whatever it was, whatever's going on that day or that week, or the problem that I'm working on or solve or whatever, and it's
Hmm.
allowed to just. So going in and out of focus and diffuse modes are like what you got to do. There's a lady named Barbara Oakley. She's a professor and she talks a lot about this stuff.
Okay.
And if you guys if you're watching this and you're interested in learning more about that, excuse me, you can go just type Barbara Oakley into YouTube and you'll find she talks a lot about this stuff.
That's
But
cool.
it's cool. But it perfectly aligns with what you've experienced and what I've experienced, where it's like you hit the wall, take a break, and then it kind of changes for everybody. But some amount of time goes by where you're not engaged in that problem anymore, and then when you come back to it, all of a sudden you have insight.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I think you even said it though too that it is important, I think, to actually hit the wall for a little bit. Kind of like the lifting the weights. You have to lift the weights until you're tired.
you have to hit the wall.
You
It has to be driven by effort.
yeah.
Yeah, because that's you telling your brain where you need it to grow, like literally
Hmm.
grow.
Hmm.
That's cool. I'm really glad that we talked about that for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um, okay, so let's go into that a little bit more. Would you have time to exercise when you were in school?
Uh, if I didn't, I made time for it. It was extremely important for me to have something that I would go do that wasn't brainy.
Yeah,
I needed to, like, for me at the time, a lot of it was skiing. Um, I would get kind of my um, relaxation. I don't is the wrong word. I can't think of the word right now, but I would burn off steam by doing something that was very active. So yeah, I made it a part of my plan. And then at some point, I actually did kind of more of like your typical gym routine, where I would go like 2 to 3 times a week, make sure that I was lifting whatever it was. That migrated over my with my interests over the years, but it was always something physical.
and you say like 2 to 3 times a week.
Hmm.
while you were in school full time, right?
Yeah.
And you were working a little bit.
I was working a little bit. I definitely realized that if I was going to graduate with my degree, I needed to kind of make it more of a priority and work a little bit less of a priority, which is the main reason I moved back in with my parents. And I
Yeah.
wanted it more. It was more important for me.
Yeah, I was able to find a situation where I think I paid like $400 in rent a month, so I only had to work maybe like 10 hours a week, so that was good.
Mm,
But yeah, I mean, if you're nobody likes the idea of moving back in with their parents, but
mm,
very often it's the smart move, because it allows you to prioritize the right way
right. It
for
removed a
sure.
lot of the obstacles I had with like paying rent and like roommate situations, all that kind of just
All
those
that
were no
stuff.
longer barriers for me.
So I'm glad you said that you prioritize exercise, because I think a lot of people look at it like um, it's a waste of time. If I'm not reading and if I'm not studying and if I'm not practicing problems, then I'm wasting my time, right?
Right.
But I guess the way I look at it is those things, this is going to sound funny, but like those things, reading, problem solving, studying, whatever, you're using your tool, right?
Hmm.
Your brain. But exercising is sharpening the tool, right?
Right.
And sleeping and eating well and all those things, you're making your tool more effective.
Hmm.
Yeah. I can see someone writing a comment about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing my best not to laugh at
It's
myself,
okay.
but
Hey, bro. Yeah, you just gotta sharpen your tool, Pat.
um, I just think it's extremely important to do something that's not brainy.
Not only
Um,
because it sharpens your tool, but because it's like good for mental health, right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, that's kind of more why I would do it.
Yeah.
It probably did help me in terms of like academic studying and all that, but academic prowess. But honestly, I did it more for mental health. I needed an
Yeah.
outlet.
Yeah. That is exactly what my experience was when I was in school. When I was in school, I didn't know all this stuff that I'm talking about right now.
Yeah,
But I would go play racquetball on the weekends because it would allow me to just like,
yeah. Burn off
that's,
stress. That's really what
yeah,
I was looking for to say earlier. Is like it's a way to outlet stress and just kind
yeah.
of,
Yep.
you know,
100%. Okay. Did you have a problem with procrastination?
Um, yeah, probably not like an extreme problem. I think I've just like the typical procrastination that I believe everybody experiences at some level. It wasn't a huge barrier for me, but it definitely like I would rather be playing video games than like studying, for example.
Yeah.
But I would kind of attack that by ripping the band-aid off and just doing it, even though I didn't, even though it was kind of unpleasant. Sometimes I needed to just do it, or I would kind of set it up so that I would almost reward myself for doing something like you can play video games later tonight if you study now, like things like
Yes.
that.
Very good. I find that I've been thinking about this lately because right now I'm developing, I think I talked to you, I'm developing a course to help kids kind of have more success in school, a course that teaches them a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now. And
Mm-hmm.
I found that when you have something like studying or whatever that you need to get done, but your kind of monkey brain doesn't want to do that thing. It wants to play video games. That there is some curve, you know, of objection that you have to kind of climb.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get to the top and you're doing the thing, it's a lot easier.
Right.
So I guess my question is, what was that curve like for you and how did you shorten it? How did you make it so when you first had the thought of doing the thing to getting to where you were in it and engaged, how did you bridge that gap like the shortest amount of time possible? Because I think people waste a lot of time in that zone where they're just like, oh, I got to get started. Okay, I got to
Yeah.
get a, you know.
Yeah, I kind of have encountered this a lot recently in just other podcasts that I listen to about kind of task switching and like how much time is actually involved to get the gears running in this other task, and it's like 15 minutes at least, um, if not more. But the point being, for me to kind of get those gears running for studying, for example, I think they I think the way that I would accomplish that with the least friction is to do it on like I would commute to the university on a train system here
Yeah,
or a bus, and I had nothing else to do. So I might as well just crack open the book and start studying then and there, because otherwise I'm just, and sometimes I would prefer to just stare out the window and listen to music, but I would use that moment, that time to kind of like at least open the book, kind of look through it, get things kind of started. And it was pretty painless at that point because it's not like I could do anything else at that time.
sure.
Beyond that, I can't really say that I had a huge method to studying. I would just kind of rip the band-aid off and do it because I knew it
Just
needed to be
go.
done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gotcha. Excuse me. Okay, there's a couple other questions here that I kind of forgot to ask while we were talking about the other stuff. So for people that are, getting into a degree like this, do you have any good suggestions for ways that they can, good lifelines for them, good resources for them to kind of, um, move their math education along?
For math specifically,
For math specifically, yeah.
um, every university that I know of has some form of a math tutoring center. Um, there's always some sort of like a help desk. Whether I don't know, since I have left the academics, I'm not sure if those are all now virtual or if they're still in person. I have no idea, but I know that there's some form of a help desk. Those are hugely helpful. Um, People like myself actually had to work in those for a while, um, because that's part of your as a graduate student, you're supposed to actually like teach. I mean, I actually taught real courses, like full courses, but at the same time, like part of our teaching, we did actually have to go to this tutoring center and help younger students learn how to do their calculus problems, whatever it was. The nice thing about those is you're getting engagement with people that are not professors. You're getting engagement with students themselves who have their own like little tricks of like, oh, this was really hard for me. Let me show you what I did to get through this because this was really hard for me, and like this helped me solve this problem entirely. So you get kind of the student perspective on it from those types of centers. So tutoring centers at your university, college, I think would be your first go-to.
Yeah.
Peers. I think it's extremely important to have a peer in your math course specifically. I have friends that didn't major in math. They went into engineering and they still were like a study partner in those math courses. Um, just find friends. It's a good way to socialize, network, meet new people, and I think that's hugely important. You can lean on one another and um, kind of gauge yourself with that other person's understanding, and then I know that there's a lot of online resources
There's a
these
lot
days.
of stuff for sure. There's a lot of stuff.
I mean, Khan
Okay.
Academy is the one that was the big one in college when I was in college, and I'm sure it still is, but I'm sure there are others at this point too.
Khan Academy is great for, I feel like Khan Academy is really good for all that, early level math. Well, early level for you. Um, but yeah, Khan Academy was very helpful for me
Yeah.
for sure. Okay, cool. What would you say your favorite class was?
Hmm. Undergraduate or graduate?
Both.
Undergraduate, I would probably say, oh man, that's hard. Undergraduate, I'd probably say numerical analysis. I took it from who would eventually become my PhD advisor, which is probably the main reason I really liked that course. Is I really loved the way that he taught, and yeah, he's a great man. Um, but it's a kind of a toss up because I also really liked like I said, I took a pure math course and it was abstract algebra, modern algebra, and I don't use it at all, but I just loved it for whatever reason. I was just going to this school and I felt like the mathematician, right? Like I just was like, oh, I'm kind of solving these pretty pictures in my head, and it was fun. It was enjoyable. It was kind of artsy.
You don't understand what I'm going through.
So that was undergraduate. For graduate, it's a little bit tricky because it's more about your thesis writing and research experience than it is about the actual courses. But if I were to pick a course that I just loved because the subject material was cool, was one of the exam prereq courses. I can get into the details on what that means, but point being is it was an applied math course. Functional analysis is what you would probably call it, and it's really studying the relationships between a bunch of different functions and objects and spaces. And it was just cool because like you kind of see how to set up engineering problems in a very general sense.
Sure. What was the catalyst for you to go into your master's?
Um, the original catalyst was I graduated and didn't know what else to do with my time.
they said
You asked me
hey
earlier.
they said go home, go away,
Yeah,
and you're like, I don't have a home.
yeah. They at the time, you asked me earlier in this video what I wanted to do with my degree. I had no idea, and this was a perfect example of that. I got my degree, undergraduate, and didn't know what else to do. I liked what I was doing. I wanted to keep studying. I had always kind of thought I would go at least get a master's. I was originally thinking an MBA. My original motivation behind that was because that was my mom's course. She did an undergraduate in math, just like I did.
Gotcha.
So Apple didn't fall far from the tree on that. And then she went on, did an MBA, and then she got a job as a database administrator. So I was like, well, she did pretty well, and we had a comfortable life, and maybe I can try and do that. So I was always going to do a master's, but I thought it was going to be an MBA. I decided I didn't like business at all. I still don't, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
So I decided to just pursue a master's in mathematics. And then on the way, I was like, nah, if I'm going to do a graduate degree in math, I'm going to go for the jugular and go for the PhD.
If only you knew.
Yeah.
I'm
Like I
just kidding.
said, I picked math thinking it was
I,
going to be short. It was not
I just
short.
Well, so how long did it take you from when you finished your undergrad to get PhD?
6 years.
Okay, that's not that bad.
No, I just
Um,
mean like graduating turned into graduate school is my point. So it added 6 more years than I was
yes,
anticipating.
yes, yeah. Congratulations, you get 6 more years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, was it kind of uh, your master's and PhD? Was it kind of all going the same? Was your thesis kind of all inside there, or did it just kind of start when you did your PhD?
So the way that it was working at my time, a master's in applied math you pick up on the way to the PhD. Essentially, you
Oh,
get it by when you're getting a PhD, you have to pass some qualifying exams, and then you do a thesis. That's kind of the general idea of how it works. You get a master's by passing two of those qualifying exams. You have to pass three for a PhD. So you basically sign a piece of paper, you get a master's. I did do a master's in statistics that was completely disjoint though. So that's kind of actually why it took me 6 years is I had extra material that I was also covering in a master's in statistics.
so you got two masters.
I have two masters, yeah.
Damn.
But I don't count one because it's just like it's the PhD and a master's in statistics.
Yeah. How were those exams?
Hard. I mean, they're the hardest exams I've ever taken in my life.
Wow, that's cool. What was your thesis in?
Thesis was on, oh man, it was on restarted Embers Born series, which is a particular series expansion that we used to solve a particular, actually an engineering type problem. It was a hydraulic tomography.
Pretend
Um,
like we're all five
okay.
and explain it.
Series, okay. Series expansion means that you're trying to write a function out where, oh, okay, my phone is going nuts. It thinks I'm saying Siri, not series. Um, okay, series expansion. I'm trying to solve some sort of a problem where I can't write my function f of x as sine of x. It's not just an easy function like that. I have to express it as like an expanded summation of a bunch of different terms 1 plus x squared plus x cubed over 3 factorial, things like that. So that's a series. and we were using the same concept, but it's a much higher level um, space that we were working in. But it's the same idea where you're trying to solve something using a summation of a bunch of terms rather than just a single term. That's a series expansion. It was a particular series called the inverse Born series. And we were trying to solve a hydraulic tomography problem. And you can think of it, and I think we probably, in the paper that we wrote, talked about water aquifers. So you would inject pressure into a well over here and see the responding pressure in a different well that's also connected to that same aquifer. And you're trying to infer what does this underground aquifer look like. I say water. It was highly likely we weren't doing that for water purposes. And I'm pretty sure it was for petroleum, but
Yeah, yeah.
that was part of it. Another chunk of it was imaging with light, which sounds kind of funny. But so I guess a better way to explain this would be if you think about traditional radar technology, you're sending off a ping, some sort of a signal, and you're waiting for that ping to bounce off something and come back to you. And then from knowledge of how long it took to send that ping, and then you do it in a couple different locations, you can start to triangulate where that little thing is that reflected that energy back at you. We were doing a very similar problem, but using light. So where you couldn't actually measure travel times, basically means that you don't know how long it took for that thing to bounce back at you. You just know how much of it bounced back at you. So you could see how bright it was when it came back, for example, rather than on its way out.
Interesting.
Um, in a very in a very technical sense, it just means we were imaging without phases, is what I mean. That was another huge chunk of it, and then the final chunk of it was we were characterizing the statistics of a particular material as it undergoes annealing. So annealing, if you think about a piece of metal and you have all these different grains that are actually in the metal, and if you heat it up, that is a process called annealing, where these grains try to kind of self-align into kind of an energetically favorable position. And
Yeah.
it actually can make the material stronger, more brittle, depends on what the material itself is.
Yeah.
Uh, and we were trying to understand, in this case, it was texture development. And so we were developing pretty deep mathematical theory of, during this kind of what is called a grain coarsening process, what is the best way to characterize this over time. And so we were doing a statistical characterization of material science during an annealing process, a coarsening process.
That's so those are three pretty heavy things. Did you guys come up with that yourself, or did your advisor kind of come to you with those things?
Typically, unless you're kind of I mean, there are these people, and if you're like a genius person to have your own idea already by the time you enter graduate school, then you'll do that with an advisor that has good standing. I did not have those ideas. Those were basically directions that I had two PhD advisors. The one was the imaging and the expansion stuff, and then the other advisor was more of this material science end of things. And they each had already been kind of working in these particular domains and avenues, and so they had some ideas of what they wanted to do. But what they will do is they'll say, "Okay, I want to do a problem that's in this direction. Can you go off and find something that it looks like a thread that we can start pulling on to find some sort of an interesting project to do?"
Yeah.
And so that's really what we did. And so, like with the imaging one, we found a particular trick that you can leverage where you're solving what's called a least squares system. And so it actually was really simple at the end of the day to solve a least squares system to do this imaging without phases, meaning without the travel times. So it was like, here's a general idea of what I want to do. Go find something that is interesting and pull on that thread. And then, yeah.
That's cool. That's interesting. I mean, you're doing applied mathematics, but it sounds like you could have described the same project if you were doing like a master's in physics, I feel like,
Mm-hmm.
you
Well,
know?
a good example of that is I'm working right now. Like I said, I work for Cirrus Logic, and part of our work, we were doing a lot of work with batteries, lithium ion batteries, and just kind of like first principle research stuff. And we have some interns, and they're doing a lot of the same mathematics I would have been doing in math to study lithium ion batteries. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of crossover. Like I said, applied math is as close to engineering as you can get without um, being in engineering itself.
That's cool. So just to kind of wrap up your school journey, did you go into academia after your school?
Yeah, I did. I started pursuing that career path. Uh, I
You
did a
thought about
postdoc.
becoming a professor?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
uh, I took a postdoc at UT Austin. So that would have been kind of what people would have considered kind of a research professorship. It's not tenured at all. It's just a fellowship is really what it is. And so the academic track, you end up doing like at least two of those, probably three these days before you land your first tenure track position. So it requires a lot of moving around. So I did mine in UT Austin. I just did my first one. And at that point, decided for personal reasons that it was ready. It was time for me to move on to the next chapter of my life. And so I left academics.
You didn't really agree with the
Not with the
academic life.
family life that I have. Like I said, I have two small children, and it works for some people. It was not going to work for me in my
Gotcha.
situation. So
Gotcha. And then after that, so you said you went to work for a bank. Was your initial
yeah, yeah. I
how
worked for
how was that
uh,
transition from very heavy academia
Stark,
to
Stark.
yeah? What was that like?
Uh, well, so I went from a job where I could walk in at any time of the day that I wanted to, or not even go in if I didn't want to because I wasn't teaching at the time.
Yeah.
And that was my job. I had no schedule. I could just do my own. As long as I got my work done, it was fine. I could do it from wherever. And then I switched over to a job that required me to be there 9 to 5 in a tie.
No,
And so this is how I dress. I don't
I know.
I don't get dressed up often. And so that was
Yeah.
very stark. And as of the first week that I was there, was looking for a new job.
No, yeah. But
I mean, so
what
much.
were you doing there? Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say so much so that I was actually asking my postdoc advisor if I could come back.
And he's like, I knew you'd say that.
He was supportive. They
Yeah.
actually my entire academic staff, committee, and everything. They were all really supportive of my move into industry. But he even told me he's like, just give it a little bit of time. I'm sure that it's just kind of a growing pains. Um,
Sure.
it wasn't. I knew that I needed to get out of that job, and I did. So, what was your other question though?
There is kind of a gut feeling that you get,
Yeah.
whatever you're doing for sure. What was my question? Oh, what was your role at that bank?
I was a quantitative analysis analyst, quantitative analyst. So they call them quants a lot of the time. I was in charge of forecasting securities um, over the next several months at that time. So you would look into the historical background of a particular security that you're interested in, and try to predict what it's going to do in the short term. And that was actually one of the reasons that I wanted to quit, was because the way they were doing it was like the most mind-numbingly naive, easy thing I could possibly think of. They were looking at the history, averaging values over 6 months, and then just projecting it forward. And I could not stomach doing something so, I don't know, for lack, yeah, it was
Yeah,
just way too simplistic for me to want to work for doing something like that.
interesting. So, how come did you ever think about going into into Wall Street and doing some of that stuff with kind of that skill?
That would have been interesting. Like if I had done that, and I think when I took the position, I believed that I was going to be doing something more like
Or like,
that. There's part of me that feels like you're selling your soul when you do something like that, and maybe you are. I don't know, but it would have at least been more interesting regardless. And like in fact, during those couple months that I was there at the bank, I took the time to actually learn that kind of material. Um, and just like what people do in those fields as far as like working on Wall Street and forecasting actual stocks with volatility and what they do in those positions. That would have been more enjoyable for me, but that's not where I landed.
Yeah. Did you start doing that a little bit of that stuff on your own on the side?
Little bit. And was I had grand plans at one time of actually following through on doing that a lot more, but then life has a way of catching up with you and other things become more important.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's been a
true.
long time since I've actually thought about doing that.
Yeah. Have you watched the show Billions?
No.
So it's a great show, but it's all about these billionaires that are, they're like the Wall Street, kind of. That's all they do,
Right.
and they have people called. They hired several people, quants like you, that would come in and write these programs that would hopefully predict what was going to happen. Anyway, every time I watch that show, I'm like, yeah, I could figure this stuff out. Like we could be billionaires, like anyway.
Well, Jake, if you're ready, man, let's go. I've got some
No,
spare time now.
no way. Have you followed? I was texting you guys a couple days ago. Have you followed the GameStop stuff recently with Roaring Kitty?
Not since what you last sent to us. No.
Dude, it's all rigged. It's freaking rigged. So this is completely off topic, but
Diamond hands, bro. Diamond hands.
yeah. So he held a live stream the other day on YouTube, right?
Okay.
And it was, I think at its peak, it was like 700,000 people were watching the live stream, right? And that live stream was basically very connected, well, seemingly very connected to what the stock price was going to do for GameStop.
Hmm.
And he kind of knew this. And basically, you should go and watch this. I'll send this to you after. He showed that there were algorithms in place monitoring what he said, and it would halt the stock based on what he said
Okay.
automatically. So he would say like, okay, hey everybody, watch this. Okay, I think it's time to end the stream. I'm going to end the stream. So basically,
Yeah.
the thought is that when the stream ends, the stock's going to go, do so. So he said that, hey, I'm going to end the stream now, and then boom, the stock halted automatically. And then he showed it live anyway. The reason I bring that up is because it's like, unless you're one in a million like that guy, that there's no way. I don't think there's very much of a chance that you're gonna make a unless you're where you kind of have, I think, a very specialized insight. You're not going to be a millionaire
I
in
have a
stock.
special set of skills.
I have a very, yes. That's right. You can say that. I think you need to get you a t-shirt that says that.
I have a special set of skills.
Yeah, so I don't stock my. I went down that road a little bit a while ago, but it's like whatever. This isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
The stock market thing. I think just stick with index funds and don't pay attention to it after that.
Yeah, I've landed much more on the conventional investment strategy at this point. So
Yeah, with that. But anyway, if you guys are interested in that kind of talk, investment talk, let me know in the comments, and we can talk. You can start a whole new podcast based
I
on
mean,
that.
I have talked with some like people as far as mathematicians and that have worked for places like Goldman Sachs, and they've told me kind of what they do, and it was really interesting, and they do some pretty cool high level mathematics. So like there is some fun to be had there,
I bet. Yeah, that is really, and especially since you did so much in statistics,
but
for sure. I bet. No doubt. Okay, so you stopped that, and then you went to work. There wasn't a job in between, right? You went from the
there's
bank
not. Yep, I
to
went
the
from the
other
bank to
place.
Cirrus Logic.
Yep.
Way that I got that is a net like just a social network. I had a peer who was in mathematics with me who also had this friend who worked for a group that had just recently gotten acquired by Cirrus Logic. And so I reached out to him, got a kind of very informal like meeting. We went to a coffee shop and just kind of met the guy. And then I had a real series of interviews the following week and was offered the job. and I was ecstatic. It was it was very much the change I needed.
Okay. And what is their I guess describe their business.
Yeah, so their bread and butter is we sell application specific integrated circuits, ASICs, basically chips to different technology manufacturers, laptops, cell phones, that's the type of thing. We're really good at doing mixed signal, meaning we use both analog and digital signals, and we create chips that can kind of process and handle both. Um, so that's their bread and butter, are these chips. When I was originally offered the position, I was working as a machine learning engineer. We were much more focused on biometrics initiatives. So at the time, we were going to be getting into always on, very low power, low latency, uh, secure authentication to your device, whatever that device happened to be. And so there was a lot of machine learning and mathematics that go behind algorithms like that. You have a model of yourself, and you need to try and authenticate against that model of yourself and make sure that it's you. And so that's what we were originally doing. That's not what we're doing anymore. I'm not really in that direction at all anymore. But that's how I initially got started there.
What kind of chips? Like a processing chips or what kind of chips?
No, so they're going to be more like audio codecs is a big one. Amp chips, op amps. I'm gonna go, like, if anybody watches this and they actually know a lot about electronics, I'm not really that like hardware savvy.
Sure.
I work on the algorithms that go onto the hardware. So like I'm still pretty clueless as far as actual hardware goes and what it will do. I still write software.
So
Um,
how did you get gain that skill, you know, going from your because it doesn't sound like you did that much programming in while you were in school, maybe a
yeah,
little bit.
good question. But you asked me what my favorite course was in undergraduate, and I said numerical analysis.
Yeah.
That's basically where it starts. I
Did you
did
guys use
take,
MATLAB in that course?
yeah,
That's what I did too. Yeah, we took I think engineering takes a similar mine was called numerical methods, but I probably the same.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically in your degree, you have to learn how to code. Um, I did take some actual C coursework just for fun during, as like an elective, so I knew how to code in C a little bit. MATLAB in undergraduate, but by the time I hit graduate, you're trying to simulate fairly sophisticated physics. At the time, I did a lot of MATLAB, but actually, that material science one, we had to run such large scale simulations. I had to convert everything over to C. I eventually was writing a bunch of C code in my postdoc. You learn how to code basically if you go into some of these STEM fields. It's just kind of a
Yeah.
byproduct.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just because the way we analyze and like deal with problems is just computers
Mhm.
now. So you have to, yeah. Okay, that's cool. So
Yeah.
did that, did your what you learned in school on in coding, did that translate pretty straight over to what you're doing at Cirrus?
Yeah. When I first started, the group that I was working with was primarily MATLAB based. So it really wasn't even
Oh,
like a change of language. It was just like everything they were writing was actually MATLAB based. And a lot of
wow.
engineering firms do actually use MATLAB. So yeah, it was immediate. The only difference was is I wasn't really used to writing object oriented code. I was much more used to writing really bad graduate student one-off scripts. And I say that because I was a graduate student. I wrote bad scripts, and I see them now, and I'm like, oh man, this is awful.
What does object oriented mean?
Object oriented means it's a total style of coding where you don't just start at the top of your code and then you execute a bunch of commands. You actually kind of instantiate some object that will do something for you, and then you tell that object to do something for you later. So it just means that you're building a bunch of different objects that interact with one another to execute the code. Um, yeah, I'll probably screw it up if I go into too much more detail than that, but it's just a much cleaner way of actually ordering and structuring your code.
Is an object a function?
No, an object owns a bunch of functions. So an object is this, think about it as just like an abstract blob, and it has things that are properties and methods or functions. So this thing, once you've created it, it has, n FFT. How many FFT bins are you going to have? And then it'll actually have a function in it that says execute FFT. So you'll say like, create object with an FFT equal to 128. And then you'll say, okay, do the FFT, here's your input signal. So you'll say object dot create FFT. And so it's just a way of kind of organizing all of your FFT stuff will live in that FFT object. And then so anytime you want to do an FFT, you use something from that object just to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Solidify, it's not solidify, compartmentalize, maybe pull everything into like one spot. So then you can put this FFT stuff over on the shelf, and anytime you need it, you just pull it off and use it. It's just a way of keeping that modular.
Kind of, but that's the word.
Modular is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. All right. So then, well, I guess, like you said, you're more on the software side.
Mm-hmm.
What is, if you could go into it, what is kind of your day-to-day task look like at, your job now?
Yeah. Sorry, the hesitation here is like I work for a private company, so I have to be careful with what I say. I can give you
Nope.
ideas of what I like, kind of how the day to day looks.
Yeah, just high level.
High level is I have a very strong opinion about MATLAB these days, and I really don't like it. I'm much more of a Python guy these days. No, day to day, I'll check in, kind of see what needs to be done, and I'm working on, and this is true, I am working on an algorithm with a group right now, and we are trying to get this thing to work, and there are some problems with it. It doesn't work all the way. It works in most cases, but there's some corner cases that it doesn't work very well, and we're trying to analyze why it doesn't work in those cases. So I will be assigned some sort of tasks. I have a set of tasks that I need to look into, like, does it work here? Why doesn't it work here? So that's not just like, does it work? Yes or no, because that would be a little bit too easy for this position. They actually want me to go in and understand why, either algorithmically, mathematically, statistically, why doesn't it work? So I'll actually fire up, code. I have Jupyter notebooks or whatever it is that's pulling in the data, and then I can create whatever function scripts and objects I feel like I need to in order to attack the problem, crunch the data through whatever machines I build, and then do some sort of an analysis, whether that's plots or statistical p-values, whatever it is. I will actually assemble the different algorithmic parts and plots that I need in order to do the analysis to say, this part of the algorithm is now going to work if we do this, or this one will never work, so we might as well just abandon this part of the algorithm. So that's kind of high level what we do.
That sounds like something that you could spend hours on, and then you didn't know what happened.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's true.
Which I think is really cool, because I don't think a lot of people have that kind of job,
Yeah.
where you can really be fully engaged, a lot of the time.
Right.
I've had jobs, yeah, where it's just kind of like, you're not really, where you're just kind of watching the clock.
Uh-huh.
But that's cool.
Yeah,
That
no,
sounds,
yeah, you definitely like go all the way down the rabbit hole still.
yeah,
The one kind of drawback to it is the reward. And this was, I think I think one of the questions you wanted to ask me was something about like the transition from academics to industry, and like what was that like? And what was the
yeah,
hard parts? This was actually kind of one of the harder parts. Is the payoff for your work is not as immediate is the wrong word, but it's the time horizon of it is a much longer. So like for us, we develop products that will actually ship or not ship into a consumer device. And so the payoff more is if you get that across the line and you get the first transport as a way moment. In this case, those don't come as often. Whereas in the academic world, that was my career really before I got with my current position. Your payoff is the paper or the working routine. It's like, okay, I got the routine working. Now we can write the paper. Okay, the paper is submitted. So you get these kind of little rewards along the way, and then you get the paper published, and it's a big reward. And those happen more regular than a product shipping does.
Sure. Well, because now your work is very intimately tied with economics.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
there's
it.
real world, and that's kind of where it kicks in. Is like there's real world problems affecting whether or not your work is actually purchased or not. And in the quote unquote ivory tower, that's not the case. And I say that, and I don't mean it to be disparaging, because in a lot of ways I really miss the academic life, but they just don't have to deal with that same set of circumstances that we do in industry.
Yes, yeah, for sure. That's interesting. Um, so let me ask you. So where, I guess, are you satisfied with where you are? Where do you want to? I guess, with where you've kind of jumped, and now you're machine learning engineer. Do you see kind of continuing down that road, or kind of going a different direction?
Um,
If Pat's boss is listening, turn this off.
I highly doubt that he's listening. Um, Good question. I kind of I anticipate more or less doing what I'm doing. The track that I'm on makes sense to me. I still enjoy it. I am moving now into more leadership roles, not necessarily
Wow.
managerial roles, but more tech leadership roles, as far as like tech advisory type roles, which I'm enjoying. And so I don't see an immediate need to change that. Um, there's some regrets is too strong of a word, but there's some nostalgia related to what could have been had I continued following the academic path. I truly did love what I was doing before I left. So that was a very hard personal decision for me to make when I did leave it. But that's kind of one of the nice things about following through on that STEM degree and going as far as I did is I can just, if I want to learn something nowadays, I have the confidence to just open up Wikipedia and learn it, whatever it is. Like, I want to learn this. This is really hard. I don't get this. And I'm okay with that.
I
So,
For sure. Yeah, just getting that confidence is a huge, advantage.
yeah. So yeah, I don't think that my trajectory will be changing anytime soon, but the world is dark and full of terrors. I don't know.
I think though, if I was a school, I would be recruiting people like you, who
For
have,
like professorships.
yes, who have the education and then now have very applicable industry, because most people don't go into academia, most people don't become professors. So
Right.
I would want your experience specifically, right? Where
Hmm.
it's like, hey, I have the education and I have all this really valuable industry knowledge. I feel like you would be the guy that should be teaching.
I appreciate that. Um, you're not the first person I've heard say that. Uh, I do know why that is not the case. And the research one institutions want people that have their finger on the pulse. Like they want to know what the most cutting edge research is. I don't. My paper trail is starting to dry up. I haven't had a paper out in a while. So there's like these little weird things that like the academic track highly values that I no longer have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of value to what I have learned is actually important outside of academics. Like it's huge. I can give you a good example. When you're going through undergraduate math and probably engineering to a lot. Well, I'm sure engineering actually. FFT, the fast Fourier transform. You learn how to do it. What you don't really learn how to do, at least I didn't in mathematics, is to do the short time Fourier transform and how you actually practically and pragmatically apply the Fourier transform. It's one thing to just call FFT from MATLAB or Python, whatever you're using. It's another thing to actually do the STFT and you're actually framing it. You need to know what your window sizes are. Those are the things that people actually do in the real world, and there's very real reasons why. But there's a lot more analysis involved. Some engineering courses might actually go into those details, but I was certainly never like exposed to those types of ideas in academics. It's just like, yeah, you got the Fourier transform. Moving on now. Like,
Yeah.
no, there's more than that.
Yeah.
So, so my point with that is that I wouldn't have learned that had I not moved into industry. So if
Sure.
I were to go teach, like I remember teaching the Fourier transform in a partial differential equations course. If I were to teach that now, I would actually show students, okay, this is where when you get your engineering job, this is how you're actually going to do the Fourier transform. You're not going to do it this way.
Oh, dude, That's so valuable. Like that is so valuable because that's
Yeah.
the huge complaint. I think that a lot of people make when they're out of school. It's like, I don't, we don't use what we learned in school for the most part, and it's like, yeah, that's
There's some
true.
truth to that.
There is some truth to that, and that's unfortunate. And I think in
Hmm.
a lot of ways, it's because we don't have people like you that are teaching. The people that don't
Hmm.
have the applicable kind of experience and knowledge. But anyway, well, cool, dude. It's been a while. I could keep talking to you for a long time, but if we should probably wrap it up. So if you
Okay.
have, you know, um, what is, because my audience is students for the most part, right? If you had some, I guess some hot tips, some good advice for students, what would it be?
Yeah. I took a moment to just kind of jot down just a couple bullet points just to make sure that I kind of touch on them. We've touched on a lot of them already, actually, but to kind of try and bring them all home, these would be my kind of bigger items as far as how to succeed in the STEM degree. The very first one we talked on earlier is you'll need to try. You actually will need to apply yourself. And this is coming from the perspective of a typical graduated out of a United States high school. I didn't really have to try that
Yeah,
hard. And I think that is the case for a lot of people, especially if you want to follow STEM. And maybe I'm wrong, and I'm not trying to be mean if I'm wrong, but that's how it was for me. I didn't have to try in high school. I had to try my ass off in college, and you'll need to do that. So that's kind of the first one. You'll need to try. Um, find friends, find a peer group, enjoy being the dorky nerds that you're going to be in your peer group, and like you're going to make dorky jokes about engineering problems and math problems, and they're going to be awful. They're like the equivalent of dad jokes. Enjoy it, and
yes.
like that's your peer group, and like dive into that, live that life. I found that to be a huge benefit, and like I succeeded more because of that. We talked on building the fun time, allow yourself the breaks, the physical time, burn off
Yeah,
the excess stress. And then I think this one we didn't talk much about is I don't think that you always need to have passion for what you're doing when you make the decision to do it. And I want to be clear here, it's like when you make the decision. And the reason I say that is because when I picked math, I didn't care. I just was trying to find my way out of school. Math was just an avenue for me. It was not this like, oh my gosh, my life's going to be so much better if I take this degree. And I think there's in our culture, there's a lot of emphasis on like, you need to do what you love so that you never work a day in your life, that kind of a mentality. And there's sure, if you can do that, great. Not all of us are like hardwired to know exactly what we want to go do. So what I ended up doing is I just picked something. I happen to be more or less good at it, and maybe that's good. Maybe you want to pick something that plays to your strengths, but either way, I just picked something. But as far as the passion and the like, there was no passion when I picked math. However, and this is the huge caveat, the passion developed. By the time I was done with an undergraduate, I was passionate about math. I loved it. I didn't
hmm.
want to stop doing it. That's why I went into graduate school. So the passion followed. It's not that I picked the passion. I picked something and then the passion came after the fact. So
That is very interesting, and it goes along with something I heard earlier today, and it was something along the lines of like learning breeds motivation. So like the more you dive in and the more you learn, the more motivated you are to continue.
mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times, I think to add to jump onto what you said, like if you're someone that doesn't know, isn't really passionate, because I think what you described is a lot of students where they say, I don't know, I don't know what to pick,
Yeah,
blah blah blah.
I was that. I don't know.
I don't know, yeah, and I was close to that, but I would say if you're that person and you're uh, kind of lost with what to choose, I would say pick something that you think you might be interested in, but most importantly, pick something that will challenge you, you know,
Yeah,
because that's something that like you can really, that will, regardless of the topic and the material, that it will develop you because it's hard.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
awesome.
yeah, it'll grow with you. You'll grow with it. The passion comes. It's not always doesn't have to be there out of the gates.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that you said that because I think a lot of people get stuck up on that, and I think people feel guilty, um, you know, because they think that oh, I have to be passionate to be happy, or I have to have this passion,
Right.
and when in reality this passion thing is kind of a little bit more complex. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. I think that was fantastic, dude. I
Cool.
really appreciate you coming on with me. And
Absolutely. Anytime.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
happy to do it.
if you guys have questions for Pat, just put them down in the comments, and we'll try to get them answered. But I appreciate it, man, and we'll see you before too long.
Sounds good.
All
Thanks,
right,
Jake.
see you, Pat.